Hello, Bill.
Good afternoon, Matt. I got you. I got you after lunch. So this, I don't know. I know you feel your A games in the morning and your
Yeah,
your C games at night. Am I? Is this B game for you, or are you a little? You get a little logy after lunch.
this is B game, B game. So you're not gonna get the best, but you're gonna, it's still better than the rest. So
Okay. So
that sounds like a pizza box, like something that would be like a little message. Rocky's Pizzeria. You tried the rest, now try the best. The local little place.
I figure, Matt, that what the world needs is two white guys talking about the Isla Vista shooting. We haven't really heard the white male perspective on it all yet. Uh, but
Well, watch your privilege and mansplain it to me, Bill.
um, but what I mean, there's all sorts of things to discuss about it, and uh, you know, there's no point us having a gun control debate over it. I think everyone knows how that would sound. Um,
If not, we can just refer you to the tape after Newtown, and I'm
right,
sure we talked about it extensively then, and sadly other times as well.
right. Um, but what's interesting about the aftermath of this one is there's been less. I mean, there's been a certain amount of discussion about guns because of the uh, ferocity of the one of the victims' fathers, shaming Congress for uh, not doing more on gun control in the wake of Sandy Hook, but the brazen misogyny and racism in the Killer's Manifesto, I think, has uh, dominated the discussion more than that. Um, uh, and coming off the heels of the sacking of Joel Abramson, uh, made me think. I feel like the current wave of feminism is really making its mark. They really seem to have found a language, found communication platforms, built a community that I feel is effective. I mean, it's all anecdotal. I only pick up what I see on Twitter and Facebook. There's no polling around this. I don't know if it is really changing the minds of the next generation or anything like that. I'm not equipped to say that, but my gut says uh, they are in a much better place of stature than I think feminism was when I was in college, where I feel like in the days of Rush Limbaugh calling feminists feminazis, I feel that the feminist movement then was kind of struggling, and it seems to me like they seem better able to take these news events and make them apply to people's daily lives. It seems less radical to me. It seems less ideological to me. There seems to be a sense of trying to convey, look, this is what we go through on a day-to-day basis. These are some extreme examples of what can happen. We're not necessarily saying that everyone is going to be the target of a mass shooting, but that sense of fear and anxiety, that sense of the drip constant objectification or double standards. That's the kind of thing that people go through on a day-to-day basis. I feel they're doing a good job of communicating that. I don't know what the conservative world is feeling about that right now, but that's sort of my sense of it.
Well, I don't know what the conservative world is saying about it now either. I do think that you're right that the new motto is guns don't kill people, white men kill people. That seems to be the theme if you're following the yes all women hashtag. I'm actually quite disturbed to see the sort of trend that we're in now, where liberal elites are essentially saying, if you are a man, you are a potential danger, that there should be some sort of profiling. That we're not sure. You could be a date raper or a date rapist or a misogynist. It seems to be very divisive, and I found it to be very disturbing. I do think that there is I'll step back a little bit and put it in perspective. Ann Hornaday, the movie critic, wrote an interesting column in the Washington Post in the wake of this tragedy. And I mean, let's be clear: this guy, Elliot Rodger, was deeply disturbed and disgusting. And the video is quite chilling. And none of us are should be fans of violence or misogyny. And Hornaday wrote this column essentially, saying, well, this guy's father was involved in Hollywood. Seems like he was sort of parroting in the video a little bit, kind of parroting some stuff to come out of Hollywood. And she went after Judd Apatow and talked about how, sort of white men in Hollywood have basically run things and have therefore kind of perpetuated misogyny, anti-women movies and whatnot. So that also fed into this and sparked a lot of debate. I have a sort of a nuanced take on it, which is to say, I do think that we need to take seriously the notion that Hollywood values do play a part in this, that it's one of the elements for people who are already disturbed can, and happen to see the wrong movie or something. I'm not suggesting we censor them, but I do think that, look, it seems to be pretty obvious that that movies and culture have consequences and can impact these mentally disturbed people. I am worried, though, about this whole anti-white men thing, just because the vast majority of white men are perfectly innocent, and I do fear that there's a sort of guilty until proven innocent thing that's happening. I was joking earlier, Bill, but talking about your privilege and you mansplaining things, it's pretty easy to shut down discussion and debate by and if you complain, I'm just going to tell you to man up. It is interesting, and it's hard for white men who for since the dawn of time sort of have enjoyed a certain privilege to complain about anything. But keep in mind, this is also happening at a time when, although college-educated white men are still doing quite well, there's this phenomenon where non-college-educated white men are not doing that well, are not keeping up, according to some studies at least, with women who are living in places like the Rust Belt where, jobs aren't there. They're basically losing everything. The economy's hurting them. They've lost their status. And now they're being told by the culture, by pop culture, that they're not just Homer Simpson anymore. They're not just a bumbling doofus dad anymore. But now they're also somebody that really needs to be shamed, that could be a danger to our society just by virtue of being themselves. And I think it's kind of dangerous for society when we tell a group of people who are perfectly innocent that they in fact may be bad people and that they deserve to be shamed. So that's a long answer to your question, but I don't know about the conservative movement. It is something that concerns me.
I don't think that I'm sure you can find individual commentary that is overbroad. I think going after Judd Apatow's movies misses the target here. And I'm sure there's plenty of other commentators like that I would just say I disagree with that. I don't get the broader sense that this is trying to malign the entire male gender and treat us all like ticking time bombs and potential threats. I don't consider the mansplaining term a way to shut down all debate that comes from men. I think it's trying to capture a certain type of condescension, which, quite frankly, I'm sure I have done at times. I
think you need to check your privilege, Bill. That's the problem here. No, look, this is you can say things to and about white men that you could not say about any other demographic and get away with it. It's true. There's no doubt about that.
I'm sure there are Italian Americans that disagree, and people who have invented Polish jokes who might disagree. I mean, I think there's all sorts of.
Well, I'm talking about now. I mean, there's been a lot of horrific things said and done about other people throughout history. I'm saying, like, right now. Okay, I'll give you a classic example. There's been, and by the way, let me just say, this all comes on the heels of another media elite story about the case for reparations last week. So this, just to put it in a little context, but after this shooting where, this guy clearly, wasn't getting laid, was mad at women, and somehow managed to kill more men than women in seeking retribution. So he was a loser even in his attempt to seek revenge. But putting that aside, in the wake of this, obviously targeted event where he was trying to target women, there were another revival of these stories about how most of these mass murderers are white men. Not just men, not just whites, but white men.
Well, this guy isn't even,
of course, this guy
fully white. Let's just factually
well, he was
speaking,
also he was half
white, half Asian.
He's half Asian, and the Virginia Tech shooter was Asian. So what if I were to write something? Because look, it probably is statistically true that that most mass murderers, or these sort of mass murderers, are white men. Probably statistically true. Although, why bring it up? And if it were any other group, you wouldn't, because it would be politically incorrect for me. What if I were to write a piece saying, okay, if you look at what happened in this campus, we went to like a sorority house, and the Virginia Tech shooting, you could make a case that on a campus, the most dangerous person is an Asian male. Now, what if I were to write a story about that or start pushing that on Twitter? What kind of pushback or feedback might I get maybe it's true, but that just sort of, my point is, I think that you can basically, and look, go ahead and attack me. I mean, I can handle it. I'm prepared to deal with it. Again, my concern is the innocent, like, high school educated white dude whose factory shut down in Ohio, who is also being told he's the scourge of society, while everything else in his world is crumbling.
I just don't think it makes. I mean, I think you can pinpoint various societal problems that affect certain demographics more adversely than others. Across the board, there are certain things. There's a higher rate of incarceration for blacks than whites. There are certain, non-college white working males are struggling in this economy right now because their types of jobs are diminishing. Women who get close.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Bill, but you're right. Let me just jump in, or I'll forget this. But you're right, okay? But I wouldn't write a piece, and if I did, it would not be. I would not write a piece saying there are higher rates of incarcerations of black men. Ergo, they have a problem. Ergo, they are predisposed to criminal activity. I wouldn't write that, and if I did, I would be attacked. Rightly so.
Well, you'd also be wrong. What I might write making a wrong argument. That was.
What I might write is this says that there's a problem with the way that judges are judging the case. There's a lot of you could bring that point up, and there are a lot of like legitimate arguments as to why is this the case? How can we fix it? But that's not what they're doing when they say that white men are are the ones who are these mass killers. They're not trying to find a way to help white men out or figure out, God help, why is this horrible phenomenon happening? It's basically almost a gleeful thing.
Well, I mean, I think there is. I mean, every time there is a mass killing like this, there is a certain amount of discussion about the weapons involved, and there's a certain amount of discussion about the cultural backdrop in which this happened. There's a certain amount of discussion about mental illness. I think the mental illness side, the gun side is kind of a evergreen. The mental illness side, I think, has been coming up in attention lately. I think rightly so. And on the cultural side, depending on the case, it's either video games slash movies slash music, pop culture type stuff, or it's misogyny in this case, or I had a third in my head that or it's overheated political rhetoric, like in the case of Timothy McVeigh, or in the case of Jared Loughner, which I think are pretty different cases, but that those arguments were made in those things. That's usually targeted towards extreme right wing rhetoric. You had a little bit of the extreme left wing in the case of the Unabomber, but that doesn't happen, or maybe go back to Weather Underground and stuff like that. But I think those are also kind of different cases. So from my own personal opinion, guns and mental health to me are the big ones. But there's a question whether how does the cultural issue of, in that particular case, how does the mental health issue interact with that? And what you can't ever really know is if we eradicate all misogyny today or last week, would someone who had the mental health problems that this case had, would he just latch onto some other thing and kill a different group of people for a different reason because of that, or would it actually take away a trigger point, and he might still have problems, but it wouldn't necessarily lead to a violent act? And the same thing with the guns. If the guns weren't as easily available, he'd be a violent, angry person, but maybe not as many people would have been killed.
That's a really legitimate, really good point. We don't know the answer to it. I would say that I wish that Hollywood would. First of all, there's the irony where liberals who run Hollywood create fantasy movies that arguably negatively impact society, and then they're but like think of like Game of Thrones, for example, as a prime example of sort of liberal Hollywood putting out this horrific like rapes and incest and and then of course they'd be the first to talk about a war on women and condemn it. If sort of followed to its logical conclusion, if people were to watch it and try to replicate, God forbid, the things that they're it's just entertainment. Well, I do think that there's a responsibility to and then there is a danger that you have people, especially unstable people, who see things, and over the period of years and years and years, that like ideas have consequences. And Hollywood has been selling for decades certain values, and they ought not to be that surprised when those values catch on. I mean, look, companies spend billions of dollars selling products and doing product placement because it works. And yet now we're supposed to believe that worldviews can't be sold. Now, I think that Hollywood has been selling worldviews about consumerism. Some people would say about misogyny and sexism. Long way of saying, I do think that there is a responsibility in the entertainment industry, and that some of the things that they've been selling may, in fact, be toxic.
Well, to a certain degree, I think it's unfair to expect pop culture to uh, be purely realistic all the time. There's an innate element of escapism and idealism that's going to be present in movies and TV and music and whatnot. That just I think people are generally attracted to seeing things that are um, utopian in nature. So you're never going to eradicate all unrealistic images and values. I mean, just the basic way love is wrapped up in a tidy bow, and 90% of all
Right.
of all culture. Obviously, life is not like that.
Okay, but I guess a couple things, Bill. First, I get it. Like, if it wasn't for movies, crazy people would just read Catcher in the Rye and go kill people, right? But I do think our movies today are becoming more sophisticated and more disturbing, and TV shows, and that there could be a sort of a trigger sort of reaction that some people who otherwise may not snap. And, look, I mean, we've talked about it here, I think, and I think it's pretty generally accepted that a show like Will and Grace certainly changed attitudes about homosexuality, about gay rights, and that there were a lot of people who were sort of anti-gay who, because of a show like Will and Grace, changed their attitude. And I think, look,
I agree.
But my point is, if it's possible that Will and Grace could change an attitude about that issue, isn't it also possible that violence and whatever else could be spread via TV as well?
I mean, obviously, when you take the audience of 1 billion people, one or two people might take a message in a movie or a song or a book and interpret it in a scrambled way and do something awful because of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean you censor the book or the movie or whatnot. That there's a sort of non-legal question. Are you putting out values that are healthy or toxic, and therefore is it just in being a good person in the universe should you not do that sort of thing? And I thought one element of the Judd Apatow piece that I agreed with, I thought it was unfair to pin on Apatow, was to remind folks of the so-called Bechdel test, where you judge a movie based on the fact, are there two women that talk to each other, or A, have dialogue, B, talk to each other, 3, talk about something that's not a man. I think that's what it is. And there's a whole site about this that this collects data on, through open source, and then they have several thousand movies, and I think it's like 56% of movies that have tabulated pass the test. That's a lot of 44% is a lot of movies not passing the test, which is pretty ridiculous. I mean, it should be a given that women characters have the same three-dimensional qualities as male characters, and that's a good reality check on Hollywood to say, wait a second, what are we missing? And
I blame all those right-wing directors, producers, and movie executives for that over all these years. They're ultra-conservative values.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of folks in the feminist community would say, look, this is not inherently a left-right thing. That there's plenty of misogynistic attitudes on the liberal side of the pond, and people have been pointing that out for a very long time. So I definitely think this is not something that is contained to the right wing, and so I think we are seeing a positive trend of more three-dimensional female characters. Obviously, we're not all the way there yet, but I think it's certainly better than it was 10 years, 20 years ago. So that kind of stuff, I think, is healthy and healthy for events like this to get to derive some benefit to society out of it. To say, wait, this guy had adopted some really horrible misogynist thinking. It came from somewhere. I didn't even know there was a pickup artist community. I didn't know that existed. That that puts out this toxic stuff about how women should be treated. That's bad, and it should, and it's worth discussing how to eradicate that. You can't obviously do it through the First Amendment, but you can do it through.
There are a lot of the problem is, there are a lot of jerks out there. Do you think I like them? Do you think I like these guys who are rude, crude, and socially unacceptable? Who flick you off, cut you off when you're driving, hit on your girlfriend, which for me is a problem since I have a wife. But this is humanity. I don't know that we can. I don't know that any sort of social engineering can take the asshole out of humanity.
Well, but I
think we're going to have to isolate. We're going to have to isolate.
Will and Grace point. We are more civilized towards each other, towards the sexes, than we were. I would argue. There has been a lot of discussion that has changed people's attitudes about what women can do, how women should be treated, and I agree with you that you're never going to.
But at some point, I read these articles. I read these articles in Slate, and let me tell you, there is a fine line between the way that you're out at a party or at a bar and you go up and talk to a young lady. It's in the eye of the beholder as to whether or not you're a charming George Clooney type or you're a stalker and a potential date raper. One person's sort of charming flirtation is another person's like, hey man, we need to get the RAs involved in this. I do fear that we're sort of creating this environment where, we're like criminalizing just sort of, I'll say it, boys will be boys. No, by the way, boys will be boys is a far cry from some of the egregious
of potential gray area in the world. But I don't and there's obviously debates to be had about, what's legally rape and what's not, and what's legally sexual harassment and what's not. But I think this is not necessarily rooted in that. This gets towards just a general sense of how should we be. We socialize our children. We socialize our children in our houses. We socialize our children in our schools. We socialize our children on the playground. Whether we control it or not. There are things that can be done to try to instill a sense that we talk about instilling, teaching our children right from wrong, good and bad all the time.
Right. Sure. Look, I've got two boys, and so that's really my interest in this. On one hand, of course, I'm going to raise them to be decent, good, respectable people, and if they're not, I'm going to kick their ass, and they better listen to their mom, and and of course, I want them to be chivalrous and to be respectful and to honor women and to, basically to be good people. It's as simple as that. But I also don't want to create a society where just by virtue of being boys, young men, that they're going to be shamed and criminalized and demeaned. And frankly, I kind of fear we're heading in that direction.
Well, it gets to a question of what is it when you say boys will be boys, and I'm not just trying to put you on the spot, but people say that sort of thing. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a boy? Does it mean you have to be a jerk in your dealings with women? I don't think it means that. That's not innate to who we are. There's all sorts of, brutish impulses that all people have, men or women. And we as a society have tried to be more civilized over time. Certain types of behavior, we should say, are not intrinsic to who we are as a gender. It doesn't mean you have to go towards that all types of obnoxious behavior should be criminalized. Some should, obviously, but I don't think you have to get trapped in that discussion. We could talk about, hey, what could we be doing here to just have a better sense of respect, across the board?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I'm just saying, in reading some of this stuff coming from the liberal elite, you get the sense that if, you're young and single and you go up and start a conversation with a young lady, it could be, I felt threatened by this. I felt that this was aggressive behavior. And the guy may be like, I was just, how do you meet somebody? You know, I mean, this is a huge discussion, and I guess we should probably leave it there. But
well, to go back to our usual post-Tuesday discussion of elections,
yes.
where we have more Republican primaries that have happened, it seemed like generally, you know, in the narrative, establishment versus Tea Party establishment's been winning more often than not. But in maybe Texas is Texas. Maybe Texas is not symptomatic of the rest of the country. But it seems like the Ted Cruz wing remains dominant. The times when you know, George W. Bush could win on compassionate conservatism, and Cable Hutchinson could run on a more moderate brand of republicanism. Those days seem very, very long gone. You have this guy, Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, who got tagged as being a squish, which is sort of strange. This guy's pretty conservative. Maybe you could explain why he was deemed that way, but you know, he got beat by quite frankly a nut named Ted Cruz, because Dewhurst was not seen as pure enough for Texas Republicans, and he got so dinged by that race that he couldn't hold on to his current post as lieutenant governor. Just got beat in a primary. Which I would think, you know, you can say if you're Tea Party, it's great. You still have you got a stronghold in Texas, but we all know that Texas is demographically changing. The Hispanic vote is growing in size very rapidly. It doesn't seem Texas Republicans are adjusting to that very well right now. They're doing fine for today. They don't seem to be positioned well for tomorrow.
Well, first of all, yeah, putting it in context, I mean, it's hard to say that the Tea Party's like, you know, my take, that they've sort of won, that they're losing because they've won the larger argument. And in North Carolina, Tom Tillis, the establishment candidate, won. Matt Bevin was trounced by Mitch McConnell. Ben Sass, who was a Tea Party favorite, won, but he's probably more of a mainstream conservative than people think or thought. So Texas sort of needs to exist within that context. I think that Dewhurst was clearly establishment. He has always had a ton of money, but never a real reason to vote for him. I think there's a bias, part of the Tea Party thing, and part of there's a bias for newness and freshness, a sort of fetishized newness, which is maybe an unconservative instinct, but that hardly matters. Ralph Hall, I thought, was more interesting. Congressman, he was 91 years old. He's now there will be, next year there will be no World War II vets. And I thought that was more interesting even than Dewhurst, because, I mean, there was a time when someone like Ralph Hall would have just been reelected for like old time's sake. You know what I mean? We just had so much reverence and respect for our elders, and especially for the veterans of World War II, that I think you would just give that guy, he's 91, give him another term.
And he's still sharp, right? He didn't come across like he was losing his faculties or anything.
I mean, as far as I can tell, based on what I saw, he's still sharp. As sharp as a 91-year-old could be. But he was ousted, defeated, by the Tea Party, by conservative outside groups. And to me, that's a little bit telling. I mean, look, there's an argument. You could say, well, like, someone who's been around that long, is out of touch. There should be term limits. Cronyism happens when people were in for too long. I mean, all those are good arguments. And maybe he should have just stepped aside. But I do think the fact that voters would oust a 91-year-old World War II veteran the day after Memorial Day in the wake of the VA scandal is worth noting.
And you think it's because he was just sort of seen as too inside, too Washington. It wasn't because of a certain vote that he took.
Well, I'm not an expert on the race, but I think he was generally seen as fairly conservative. I don't know that there was any one egregious vote. It was just more he's been around too long. It's time for some fresh blood, and that's that's just sort of the gist of it. But my larger point is that for better or worse, it used to be that someone like him would have been reelected. And the fact that he wasn't, I think, speaks to how we're a less communitarian populist, even in Texas, a little less communitarian, a little less populist, and a little more transient, a little more rugged individualist. That's my interpretation of this. That is sort of that an old school Texas sort of populist world doesn't oust a World War II veteran, basically no matter what. Maybe that's a bad thing, by the way. Like I'm not suggesting that's always a good thing, but I think that we've become a little more rugged, individualistic, and we've become a little more enamored by the new and the fresh, and a little less reverent for the old. And I think Ralph Hall was on the wrong end.
I wonder if this is more of a dynamic on the right than the left. I mean, I haven't crunched the numbers. I'm sure you can find certain examples where similar ousting of a veteran happened on the left, but I sense that the left sort of reveres their old bulls more, probably because there's a more of a respect for government in general. If you're someone who has learned the ways of government, knows how to make the system work on the left, that's a feature, not a bug. On the right, that's seen as you become co-opted by the system, and we want to blow the place up. So if you're getting too comfy there, we got to move you along. You have never seen, Ted Candy lose a seat in Massachusetts because he's been around too long. That's not going to happen. I don't know if you have like a 30-year lifer on the right where people say, that guy's the best, we can't let go of this guy.
Yeah, that's where I part ways a little bit with my conservative friends. I mean, there's a line in Bull Durham where Crash Davis says you got to respect the game, and I think that there is sort of, I do have a sort of a reverence for people who've been around and who, play the game. And I know that is a repulsive thing to say in the minds of some of my conservative friends. Certainly you can be out of touch and you can be co-opted by the establishment, and those are bad things. But I don't support term limits, for example. And in this case, maybe it's an argument that you don't need them because the voters got rid of this guy. They had the guts to take out a 91-year-old World War II veteran the day after Memorial Day. So maybe we don't. That's an argument for why we don't need term limits. Another point I want to make, Bill, going back to your words about Ted Cruz and Texas. Ted Cruz, of course, is going to run. He's going to run for president. If I were, it's easy for me to say what I would do if I were Ted Cruz, but here's what I would do. If I were Ted Cruz, when I got elected to the U.S. Senate, I would have said, I'm never going to Iowa or New Hampshire. I'm going to go to the Rio Grande. I'm going to go to El Paso and Del Rio and Beaumont. And Texas could be a country, of course. And we are going to do nothing but Texas. And not only that, my mission will be to build a Hispanic conservative movement in Texas. That in itself would be a full-time job. And imagine what would happen if someone like Ted Cruz devoted 90% of his non-senatorial efforts, his political infrastructure and efforts to Texas, to preserving it as a red state and making it a hotbed of activity for Hispanic conservatives, whether it's training, campaign training, philosophical training, building a bench, helping, elect Latinos to local office, That would be imagine. Look, wouldn't that not be an awesome project for someone who had the political capital to undertake?
So, I mean,
because if Republicans lose Texas,
I'm sorry, go on.
If Republicans lose Texas, it's game over, right?
Yes, I mean, I think that is certainly. I mean, if the rest of the electoral map stays as it is,
yeah,
you know, the loss of Texas, I mean, that's a electoral pillar.
It's game over.
And I can't think of another state, you know, like a New York or a California or an Illinois, where Republicans are sort of poised to snatch that up and, you know, make a trade with Texas. In the big
the Republican
game.
Party, as we know it, would have to cease to exist. They would have to radically change their policies and political philosophy in order to be a viable, you know, mathematical alternative.
Right. But what you seem to be suggesting, though, is that Ted Cruz not run to win in 2016, but to run to build a movement for the future.
Well, I don't know. Like, I think he thinks he can win. I think he thinks he can be the next president. But I think he is very movement oriented. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think he is very interested in the national conservative movement. What I'm suggesting is that things like, you know, constituent service in Texas, spending, like, instead of visiting Iowa, visit Beaumont, you know, or Del Rio or whatever. Not just Houston, not just Dallas, Fort Worth, but that's a huge place, and you could essentially spend so much time there and build an infrastructure, especially focusing on developing Hispanic conservatives in Texas. That in and of itself would be an incredibly noble project, and it could arguably have a bigger impact by staying in Texas and focusing like a laser beam on that state. That could be what. That could be the most important thing you could do for conservatism. Because, as I said,
if some parallel to what Newt Gingrich tried to do in 2012, where I'm not going to run the way the consultants tell you to. I'm not going to spend all my winter in Iowa. I'm going to just go where the people are across the country, right. And I'm going to do a lot of TV interviews, and I'm going to shake up this whole stagnant, you know, process. And guess what? You got to be in Iowa to win Iowa. You have to meet people and organize your delegates and win caucuses. But
what's more fun? What's more fun? Like going to, you know, East Texas or El Paso, and nobody really knowing you're there. Maybe being in the local paper, or going to New Hampshire and going on, you know, Hannity. Which is more bang for your buck? Which gives you more reward, more attention, more publicity? I mean, I don't want to single this one guy out. This is like pretty much the calculation that anybody would make if they were interested in advancing themselves. We all make these sort of calculations in our own careers all the time. But if you can start off your first elected office as a U.S. senator without having to be like a county commissioner or the railroad commissioner, or, you know, I know that Cruz is actually appointed to a statewide position in Texas. But my point is, it's a lot more fun to do this sort of more glamorous stuff than to do the actual spade work of building, you know, an infrastructure in Texas. So
I mean, the way I could theoretically see it working is, I mean, there is some, you know, conservative community that is wired to, you know, the conservative media apparatus. So when Newt Gingrich wagged his finger at a debate, or when Mike Huckabee does a speech about Uncle Sugar, you know, it lights up on talk radio, and these guys get a boost in the polls. You know, Newt Gingrich had these fleeting moments as frontrunner from the spectacles like that, but he had no infrastructure on the ground to turn it into actual votes. So, you know, I guess in theory you could see a way where you find a way to do national things that keep you in the press, and maybe traveling to non-obvious states is one counterintuitive way to do that. But you got to stuff some people on the ground in the early states. I mean, someone's got to get your people to the polls, because if you're not doing it, someone else is going to do it, and then they're going to that state, and you're going to be forgotten very quickly.
Yeah, I completely agree, and sometimes the blocking and tackling, the fundamentals, don't get a lot of attention, and so you can build a house on the sand, sort of a house of cards that doesn't have a strong foundation. You can do it with a lot of PR tricks and public relations, maneuvers, and sometimes PR gimmicks sort of have the effect of you can reverse engineer it. People think you're great, so you can build a grassroots base. But a lot of times these things are, very ephemeral and ethereal, and that Hannity hit a week later, people sort of don't remember it, and it sort of fades away. Whereas if you had spent that time building, an infrastructure in a state or something, that's something you get to keep usually.
We probably should wrap soon, but I do want to hear. I know you just wrote a piece after you saw the new Godzilla, which made you fear for our national security.
Well, I fear that they're putting out crappy movies like Godzilla, so don't go see it. It was horrible. The only good thing, well, there are a few good things, but Bryan Cranston's good, but he's not in it long enough to save it. But there is an interesting thing in the movie, which is these creatures, Godzilla, that Godzilla fights, called the Muto, I'm not sure. They emit an electromagnetic pulse, and in the movie, this is very convenient because it helps explain the military's impotence at defeating Godzilla. The electromagnetic pulse essentially renders technology useless. So you have airplanes falling out of the sky, weapons don't work. It also, from a sort of aesthetic cinematographer perspective, it helps when you have this silence, and then you just hear like there's no cars running, there's no guns firing or whatever. It's just complete silence before the monster shows up. So stylistically, it helps with the movie. But what I'm hoping is that there is this phenomenon, the EMP, the electromagnetic pulse, which could be some people, Newt Gingrich, Grover Norquist, some people, some conservatives have worried that this could be a terrorist threat in the future, that people could basically create an electromagnetic pulse, which is basically a surge of electricity which would destroy electrical equipment, power grids, basically take us back to the Stone Age. There's a question as to whether or not it's temporary or permanent. In the movie, it's temporary, which maybe could trivialize it. But I do hope, obviously, the one possible good thing that could come out of this really horrific, really badly done movie would be maybe that if movies start having the electromagnetic pulse, the EMP, be part of the plot device, that it could make people more aware of our susceptibility, that this could be something done by terrorists, and maybe we would fix the power grid or have backup plans prepared to handle it if, God forbid, this were to happen. So
I know Newt Gingrich used to talk about this in the 2012 campaign. So I keep bringing up Newt. I mean, the fact that this might be theoretically something that terrorists could do. What does that mean policy wise? What should the government be doing that's not currently doing if that's the case?
So, I think one would be finding a way to have, the real danger, I guess, is that this would fry power lines and power grids, and having ways to either have backup systems in terms of infrastructure, maybe also having being concerned about, terrorists getting a hold of weapons that could detonate, that would cause the electromagnetic pulse. I mean, I'm not an expert on this. It is a little bit complex. Some people say that the threats are overblown, that it's not as big of a threat, that it might happen in a locality, like you could shut down Los Angeles. I think I think that something like this was sort of happened in one of the in one of the Ocean's 11 movies, where they sort of did something like this. But look, I do think that it's possible that that governments and politicians are sometimes forced to react to potential threats when the public becomes aware of these potential threats. So if this starts happening in movies, then maybe it will force the hand of politicians to take the potential threat a little more seriously. Again, depending on who you talk to, this is either a thing that would temporarily shut down a couple major cities, or it would be a permanent thing, which would essentially destroy electromagnetic fields. Cars would never start again unless they were made before 1968 or something like this. Nothing electric would ever work again, like ever. That's the catastrophic view that some people will have, that they believe that it will be possible to have an electromagnetic pulse, which would render, computers, TV, radios, phones, cars, anything that involves like static electricity. In other words, we would go back. Well, we would go back to at least like the 1800s. You know what I mean? Like instantly. And like, think of what would happen. Never mind the susceptibility we would have to being attacked from the outside, but just think of the rioting and the things that you would have happening domestically if this were to occur. It would be utter chaos. So, not to freak anybody out, but now in the movie Godzilla, this is maybe the danger of trivializing it. In the movie Godzilla, it seems like these pulses shut things down temporarily, and then within 15 or 20 minutes, electricity works again. So there's an argument, I guess you could make, that the movie like trivializes this potential threat. But I would argue that like a lot of people didn't even know what EMP was until the Godzilla movie, and it was the #1 movie last weekend when I saw it, Memorial Day weekend. So I'm guessing it's introducing this concept to a lot of Americans who were unfamiliar with it.
Very interesting. I'm going to leave it on that note to you, sir. But
All right,
it's good to talk to you.
Always good to talk to you, Bill Scher, even if it is about hot button, controversial, and weird issues.
That's what we do. That's our service to society.
That's right, man. All right. Well, stay tuned. Check us out on Facebook /DMZ Show and on Twitter @DMZ Show. And we'll see you back here next week.
Take care.